I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with the cattle market summary for the week ending June the 14th, and finally back in the friendly confines of my home office here in Canyon, Texas, but had to get home in time to collect my Father's Day presents. I know a lot of you other fathers out there enjoyed that on Sunday too, and that's a great time to celebrate that. But I tell you what, it's summertime, guys, and traveling around like I have the last couple of weeks or so, been able to talk to a lot of different people about what's going on around the country. Took some pretty good crop tours there towards the end of last week, and got to see a lot of things that were going on. Tell you what, guys, this shortage of corn is real. Pretty much anybody you talk to, especially in the western corn belt, some of the areas in the river valleys, there's quite a few acres that are not going to be planted. A lot of it's been standing in water, and it's not coming up any on the wet spots all around. You sure see that. We had the WASDE report come out early last week on Tuesday there. It was bullish corn, but fairly bearish on beans, as they pretty much left the beans untouched. But on corn, it was the biggest May to June yield drop on record for that report. And they lowered it by 1.35 billion bushels, and that's a ton. And I would say that's probably right. And we've seen corn rally here this past week. We also saw beans rally, even though they didn't get any of that positive news, but just following the corn. And so we saw December corn end the week at 463.5. That was up 29 cents. We saw beans end the week at 923.5, up 38 cents since the report. So that's since Monday's close. So a pretty good rally for both of them. Surprisingly, beans gained a whole lot of ground, even though the report didn't help them out a whole lot. But other things I saw traveling around, I tell you what, they're putting up a lot of hay everywhere. Not going to run out of hay again anytime soon. You know, everybody got short of hay, and we saw some monster prices, people gouging for hay last winter when it got pretty bad winter all around. And where there wasn't a lot of snow, it was also cold temperatures and things like that, but pretty much depleted all the hay stockpiles all around. But guys were mowing the bar ditches pretty much everywhere I went, all through Kansas and Missouri. Everywhere they had already started mowing ditches, and usually don't see that till later if they mess with it at all. But there was a lot of wheat hay put up down here in the southern plains, but hay everywhere. And we're starting to see guys replenish their feed supplies, but the demand for cattle was good this week, especially yearling feeders, and also notice that the way people are talking, the way things are looking, there might not be as many of these yearlings coming as what they thought. We see these government reports say that we're still rebuilding. When I was out in California talking to the guys at the LMA convention, they were saying, well, remember a year ago at this time, and we were talking about how many bred cows were being sold, and nobody had a place to go with them a year ago at this time. And a lot of them were going to just straight to the packer, or most all of them were, because there was just no place to put them. And everybody was already getting short of hay then. And so there was not as many bred cows, and some of them heavy bred in some places that have a lot of fall calvers, like in southern Missouri and Arkansas. And as you go start moving back towards the southeast from there, okay, those make fall calves, those make yearlings for this fall. May not be as many out there as what they thought. We're still seeing your farmer feeders come into the cattle market right now, as they've pretty much done all they can do up in the corn belt as far as planting their beans, and a lot of them are done with their beans and give up on the corn, and they're starting to come to the market. So even though they know that their crops are going to be worth more, there's probably going to be plenty out there to feed them. Likely will be some damaged corn out there that they'll have to make silage out of. They've got a lot of on-the-farm storage, despite that one video clip you see of that grain bin getting tore down by the floods and all that grain in there getting ruined. There's a ton of on-farm storage out there, and they'll work on that. But guys want to keep diversified, and they've really come into the market in the Corn Belt the last week or two, buying some feeder cattle for the farmer feeders. But let's talk about your board for last week on the cattle futures. June live cattle futures, Monday was up 277. If you can remember that. Started out the week gangbusters, and that really put everything on a positive note. But it started petering off after that pretty bad, especially on feeder cattle futures. But Tuesday, your live cattle futures, June, was up 97 again, so 2 days positive on the live cattle arena. Wednesday was off $1.02. Thursday was off 60 cents. Friday off 27 cents, with June live cattle futures ending the week at 108.77. Still up $1.85 for the week, which is significant because we kind of had a downer week, but still your live cattle futures finishing on the positive side quite a bit. August live cattle ended the week at 104.27, up 97 cents for the week. We know we've got a lot of market-ready fat cattle here for the next couple of months, and it's just going to be interesting to see how the negotiations go with it. And will we be able to keep fat cattle over $1 on the cash market? I kind of doubt we'll be able to keep the futures. Your nearby futures for June and then for sure August over $1, but we may be able to keep the cash market over $1, and that hopefully that lends enough little basis there for guys to survive. But you know, we've got some pretty tough sledding ahead. We haven't seen any of that miserable dog day heat that always hurts the fat cattle market. Guys are just now getting, or your consumers are just now getting out there and really enjoying this grilling weather because we had such a cool spring. But as we start working into July and then August, I mean, we've got some hot, miserable weather, and it looks like it's going to get awful hot, and your grilling demand will back off. Your cattle the performance on those market-ready cattle will plunge, and guys will be ready to get those out of the pens and get them gone because they're just not gaining anything anyway. But August feeder cattle, Monday was up 257, Tuesday down $1.70, Wednesday down 32, Thursday down $1.57, Friday down 70 cents. August feeder cattle ended the week at 135.52, off $1.73 from the end of the previous week. September ended at 135.80, down $1.55. Let's talk about your fat cattle trade, which was incomplete. Now that's kind of the setup for a downer here. We didn't move near enough fat cattle negotiated last week. So through Thursday there was only 24,600 head, about a fourth of what we really need to get done. Friday there was a little bit of cleanup trade, but not near enough. But through Thursday we had live sales in the 5-area feeding region negotiated from 110 to 116.50, and you think 110, really? Yeah, that was a real deal. By the end of the week it was. But mostly your live sales through the week were 112 to 115. Your weighted average on that light trade through Thursday in your 5-area feeding region, live steers had a weighted average price of 113.34, kind of steady to weak, but not horrible compared to the previous week. Your dress sales ranged from 182 to 186, and you had a weighted average on dress steers in the 5-area at 184.90, which was actually better, almost $1 better than the end of the previous week, but we never really got the bulk of the cattle moved. So on Friday we saw a little bit more trade. Iowa had a little over 11,000 trade there. They've had a good price on live steers, but they don't move a whole lot there. But some really high premium type cattle, especially if they're clean, they can get a big price on them on a live basis. 114 to 117.50 moved a few more live cattle in Iowa, but it was mostly dressed and mostly from 182 to 184. Kansas had a few hundred cattle sell there, And we saw it middle of the week. We saw them trading 110 to 112, with that 110 being late June. But by the Friday, we saw cattle selling at 110 and planning on those shipping here within just a few days. So that's kind of our market at the end of the week is $110 in Kansas, the Southern Plains. Of course, Texas didn't sell hardly anything, but that's a disappointing market in the Southern Plains for live cattle. Nebraska had about 5,300 head confirmed. We don't know if they did anything after hours. We really don't feel like it. It's just going to be a big incomplete market. So as we move into this week, your cattle sellers need to dig those heels in the ground, because your packers need cattle. They're probably going to need cattle to finish out this week. But if they can dig in, it all depends on how the board opens up here on Monday. If it's down hard, your guys are going to start puking them again. If it kind of holds steady or gains a little bit, we could see some positive, maybe higher trade early to mid part of the week on your negotiated feedlot sales. But Nebraska, 5,300. They had some live sales from 112 to 113 on Friday, and some dress sales from 182 to 185. Box beef cutout values, some lower but not terrible. Last week, your average trade for last week on choice cuts, 222.11. That was down 47 cents compared to the previous week. Selects, 206.25, down 82 cents from the previous week's weighted average. So that's a choice select spread of $15.86 on just short of 600 loads of cuts, grinds, and trimmings. That's not too bad. As we've talked here all spring, that they're doing so much of that dressed meat trade out front and keeping it off of the spot market, and it's harder to see what's going on. These packers are just as ruthless on that end as they are on the buying end, guys. But you look at the slaughter for last week, it was encouraging. 665,000, that's one of our biggest weeks. That's 3,000 more than the previous weeks and 17,000 more than the same week a year ago. So as we look at some of our feeder cattle auctions, I noted earlier that your farmer feeders have really gotten aggressive here, as most of them have kind of finished up kind of a disappointing planting season. And yes, they're aware that these grains are going to get higher and have gotten higher, and but still they want to feed some cattle. They need to make some money. It's not just your cattle feeders. Your row crop farmers have not made any money for quite a while, and they need to have a good year this year. But you look at your real-time index on Cattle Market Central late in the week, based on an 800-pound steer. It was at 133.96. That's $1.36 higher than the previous week. So we saw that your feeder weights of steers were sure higher. Your latest CME index is at 134.25, so real tight in there what your real-time index is. But definitely midweek on, we saw that, and definitely up in the northern plains and in the Midwest, close to your farmer feeders, we saw your feeder steers and heifers too getting higher. Probably $2 to $3 caught most of it. And depending on how the board opens here this week, we might see some recovery in your early week sales. But I'd say just kind of steady, strong in your early week high volume markets. But let's look at some markets late in the week last week that give a good test. Fort Scott, Kansas had about 1,800 feeders on Saturday, and they had a good sale the Saturday before, and they had a good sale this past week, but it's a good indicator of what the market was. If you look at this market report from Cattle Market Central there, you see that the represented weights of feeder cattle and pretty much all classes, all weights of steers and heifers at Fort Scott were kind of $1 to $4 higher. That's significant, late in the week on a Saturday like that. But look at your well-represented weights of steers. 262 head of 6-weight steers averaged 650 pounds on the button at 139.47. That's near $3 higher than the weighted average from the previous week. Didn't have a good test of 7 weights, but 153 head of 8-weight steers at Fort Scott averaged 888 884 pounds at 127.60. That was up nearly $1. And then another 153 head of 9-weight steers at Fort Scott averaged 931 at 124.95. That was over $4 higher. Including this one load here from Fort Scott, 57 steers weighed 910 pounds at 131. Now that's definitely higher, guys. You know that. Look at some other individual quotes. Neil Bray, talked to him from Mankato, Kansas, out at Visalia, California at the LMA convention. He says, hey, I want my sale barn to be part of this. We gained several markets while we were out there at the LMA convention, talking to guys that want to be part of this automated reporting, be on the feeder flash more often if you're not getting on there at all. That's where I get the bulk of my data, is from National Beef Wire, Cattle Market Central, and it won't hurt you, and it's free, and we'll even give you one of these screens back here to put up in your sale barn. But from Mankato on Friday there, 56 head of 922 pound steers bring 126.85. Pretty strong market there in Mankato. A couple of other individual quotes. Started having some good sales again at Creston, Iowa. Kurt Sporleader partnering there with one of Tom Fry's sons there, Cody, and they're starting to have some good sales. Had an awful good market there late in the week, last week on a Friday there at Creston. Look at this individual quote. 65 head of 832 pound steers at Creston bring 138.50. But the big quote, of course, it always comes way up there in Nebraska, it seems like. But that's where your farmer feeders are at, and they're getting heavy for these cattle, heavy demand, and the heavier the better. They like in these big cattle here that are already well on their way. It won't take as much of that grain in case it does get even higher. Crawford, Nebraska, 110 head of 990 pound steers in Crawford bring 134.25. That's a look at your week's markets from a home DV auction office here in Canyon, Texas. We'll talk to you next week.